Okay, let's just start talking about your book. You've got a brand new book out, and what's the title of it?
It's called Shoals, Two Tales of a City. It's about William Church Whitney and the Electric City, whose statue is in front of the courthouse, the only Andersonian with a statue. And it's somebody that we need to know more about. I had to. It was important to me to know more about him. A very significant historic figure. That's the 1895 history. Then the other tale, I skip 100 years to 1795. In 1795, this property down here, which is known as High Shoals, was called Pickens Shoals. And there was a mill here. It was called the Widow Pickens Mill. And I have a 1794 deed to a Captain John Pickens. It was interesting to me because I was trying to identify him with my friends, the Pickens family here, Billy and Marshall and Becky. They have their history and they've let me have access to that, and I've read it and I quoted a lot in this book, get a lot of my information from there. A lot of this information here is compiled. It's a different venture for me. My writing style is humor. And I've said in one of my books that people think if you don't tell the story the same way every time, that you're lacking in credibility. They question your credibility. But those people don't understand the art of embellishment. You embellish to amuse your friends, and you lie to protect your hide. The difficulty I encountered in this venture is that this is historic, which calls for accuracy, and so I had to curb my impulses, and I had to contain myself with those matters that I could document and give proof of. But the 1795 history, in order to understand that history, I had to go back to the Revolutionary War. One of the things that people don't seem to know, and there's a reason for that, I guess, but Anson, Oconee, and Pickens counties were never a part of colonial South Carolina. The area that's now Anson, Oconee, and Pickens was Cherokee country. Cherokees, Choctaws, and Creeks. When the Revolution came, I start with General Andrew Pickens, who was the general of the American militia. He and his group had the British, the Loyalists, or Tories they called them, in 96, they had them under siege. In his unit there, in General Pickens' unit, was two of his brothers. They were captains. One was Captain Joseph Pickens, one was Captain John Pickens. So naturally, I thought that the John Pickens, who owned High Shoals at one time, was the brother to General Andrew Pickens. Well, when you make a study of the Pickens family, first of all, they're very prolific. There are a lot of them. And they use the same names. They have the names they like and they use them over and over again. It's easy, as a result of that, to relate them all to the same family, but it's awfully hard to pin them down specifically as to which branch of that family they belong to. So that was one of the problems that I encountered in this, and of course, I enjoyed doing it. Well, it turned out at the siege of 96, Captain Joseph Pickens, it was documented that he was killed by sniper fire. So he didn't survive it. And then what happened during that war, the British had induced the Indians to fight on their side. Well, here you had, on the one hand, the Whigs, they called themselves, or patriots, who were the Americans fighting for their new country, their new constitution. Then you had the Tories or Loyalists, who were the British sympathizers. And then you had the Indians. Well, the Indians had two choices. They could join either side, but they were going to lose either way they went. It was a terrible thing, and that's another history that everybody ought to read and appreciate what we did to them, but that's not the purpose of this story. But anyway, the Indians fought Indian style, and so they burned homes, they destroyed crops, they destroyed people, the Long King Massacre being one of them. As a result of that, Andrew Pickens, who was sympathetic toward them, but he was also very loyal to his obligations and his duties as an American, and he led punitive expeditions against them. In 1777, they had to cede all of their territory to the United States. And that's when this became the new frontier for South Carolina. And in this book, I have some little maps that shows how it looked. It started out first, 1769's little map shows Cherokee country. That's Anderson, Oconee, and Pickens. 1785, it became 96th District, and this little strip up there was Indian country. In 1800, it became Pendleton District, and a smaller little tract up there for Indian country. In 1826, it shows Anderson and Pickens counties. And then in 1868, it shows Anderson, Pickens, and the Oconee counties. So these little maps that were done by WPA workers, and I got them from my friend Beth Ann Klosky's book that she wrote for the Centennial. Good friend, good writer. She's deceased, but a very honorable and very scholarly lady. And I quote very liberally, but I try to give her credit where credit is due, because she certainly has provided a lot of the information that I have in here, and a lot of it is it duplicates what she said. I just lifted from her book, as a matter of fact. Well, let's go back to Whitmer. 1895. He's standing in front of the Anderson Courthouse, got a watch in his hand, looking up at a street light. Now, he's not waiting for the bus. He's not hailing the taxi cab. He's waiting for them to throw the switch to turn on the streetlights downtown as a part of his experiment in the transportability of electricity. Anderson, as a result of his experiments, became the electric city, and this was the route right there. That was the first step in that direction. 6.2 miles from High Shoals, where we are, to that point is the distance that the transported that electricity that was generated by a little generator on the floor of the grain mill was here. The background on that is you had Thomas Edison, who was so renowned for his experiments with all types of things, including electricity. And he was an advocate of direct power. When you use Thomas Edison's power, which they did up in that New England area, when you use his power, that direct power, you had to build your plant within a mile of the source, because to go beyond that, you had to have a series of expensive relay stations to reboost and transport that direct power. During that time, Westinghouse and Tesla were advocates of alternating current. And the advantages that they offered and said that alternating current had over direct current was that it could be transferred over a distance. Whitner was the city engineer for Anderson, in charge of water, power, and that was his job. An interested man. In this book, I write about him, but I put his letters in there. he said more about himself in his letters than I could say. And he was a very prolific letter writer. He had all of his thoughts and his details of his history, all of that. And the letters are in there. It's significant history. It's something everybody in this area should know. Well, he went up to New England and they built him a generator. He brought it down here. And so when they threw that switch, the light came on downtown, and he proved through that experiment that alternating current was superior to direct current because you could transport it over a distance. Using that, the results of that experiment, he went out to try to Shoals on Seneca River, now under Lake Hartwell. They built a big hydro plant there. The textile mills had been previously using steam, and he brought electric power to the textile mills. These things are first, a lot of them are first in the country. Not a first for that type of thing, but a first application in that way. He applied it differently and did things with it that hadn't been done before.
Practical. Yeah.
Yes, sir. And so on the strength of that, Anson then became known as the Electric City. He left here, he went over to York County, and these things are included in his letters. He set up little hydroelectric plants there on the Catawba River, one of which became Duke Power Company. So, in many ways, this is the genesis of Duke Power Company, that experiment, because without that experiment, he wouldn't have gone to those other things. He also expressed regret that he left here because he had done so well here, and that's one of the things he regretted, that not staying here and enjoying the fruits of his labor, so to speak. In my book, like I said, I skipped from 1895 to 1795. I skip over trivial things such as a civil war, things that have been already written about in such great detail that there was nothing I could add to it. So I think that I call these two tales, I call them glimpses of history. I'm not a historian. I'm a lawyer, retired. You might say reformed. But that's what I am. I'm a lawyer. I have history as my hobby. I'm not a historian. But in gathering this information and having to confine myself to documented matter, I came up with a whole new respect for real historians and what they do. History is exploited, misused. So many times people dig into history to show how great the ancestors were, or to how badly they were treated, or as an excuse for something, or to enhance their image and that sort of thing. History is vitally important to us, that we be accurate and honest. I have a book that's over 100 years old. I have a number of books that are over 100 years old because I collect those books. I have one, The Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, very popular around 1900s, the early 1900s. People quoted from it very widely. And this book was printed back about that time, over 100 years ago. But in these quatrains that he writes, one of them I like a lot of them, but one of them has application to this event. He says, the moving finger writes, and having writ moves on. Nor all your piety nor wit shall lure it back to cancel half a line, nor your tears erase a word of it. is written, is true. Don't distort it. Study it, learn from it, because the things that happened in the past will light the way that we should conduct ourselves in the present and in the future. You have any questions about anything?
Well, two things. One's more general, and you were talking about the importance of history, and yet we've just seen a recent study came out that said it's becoming one of the least taught things in our schools. That history is, the major of history is diminished to almost very few majors. And how do you think we can engage people in realizing what you're saying about how important history is?
Well, for one thing, maybe it's good that they're not teaching it, because in too many instances they've been distorting it. And if you're going to distort it, you're better off not to teach it. Rather, it's best for it not be taught at all than to be taught the wrong way and saying the wrong thing and for the wrong purpose. I had a fourth grade teacher. She was a pretty woman. This is Courtney School down in Charleston on the waterfront, Cooper Riverside of Charleston, where I was raised. All the boys had a crush on her. All the girls wanted to be like her. She would call out the words. She'd call out the numbers. We would add them up or spell them out. Then she would say, I want you to grade each other's papers. So we would swap papers and grade each other's papers. Then one day she said, I want you to grade your own paper. That hit me, even in the fourth grade. My integrity was on the line. Well, it means more to you as you grow with it, and as you live with it, and as you experience your life in the light of that. But it impacted on me at that time, very much so. What I realized, and what we should all realize, we're being graded. People see what we're doing, and we're being graded. That's what we call reputation. They grade your paper, and that translates into your reputation. At the same time, you're grading yourself, and that translates into self-esteem or self-evaluation, contentment. What I've learned in my long life, and I've been around a long time, I'm 91 years old, I'll be 92 in October. What I've learned is you can study all kinds of theology and philosophy and sociology. You can study all those things. And you can speculate about the next world, and you can worry about it, you can argue about it. A lot of people do. I don't. I don't worry about it. I recognize that it's beyond my capacity to know. Another quatrain from Omar, he says, there's a door to which we have no key. There's a veil through which we cannot see. And that's what he's talking about. We're limited, we're finite, and we're talking about the infinite. You can think about it, but you can't dwell on it because you don't know. But what you do know is you have an obligation, a responsibility to yourself, your family, and everybody around you. You have a responsibility to live in harmony with nature and the people around you. Don't exploit people. Don't exploit nature. Don't do things that are dishonest, that when you grade your paper, you're going to feel bad about yourself when you recognize you did that. And we do. We sit back and reflect over our lives. Don't do them, because when you're sitting around later on, you start thinking about them, then you have regrets about it. So eliminate those things to the extent you can by simply living in harmony with nature, understanding it, being good stewards of natural things.
And it's difficult to do that without some understanding of history, correct?
History is essential, but it has to be accurate. An inaccurate history is a lie. And why lie to yourself? Why lie to other people? What advantages do you think you're going to get? Long-term advantages. I don't even know if you get a short-term advantage from it. I know there's a price to pay for it. If you're dishonest, it says, unto thine own self be true. Thou canst then be false to any man. If you're true to yourself, you can't be false to anybody else. That's the value of that grading your own paper thing. That's a significant thing, particularly for a fourth grade teacher. And to remember it all these years, and it's been an integral part of my life all these years. I love teachers. I respect teachers. Good teachers are important, almost as important as good families. Good families are essential to a society. A mother and a father in a home, people who you know, whatever happens outside, when you come inside, you got people there who understand you and support you and care about you. Then you can get the nurtured from that and go back out in the world and do whatever you have to do and come back in. You need that. Good teachers, the same thing. They teach the subject matter. Don't play games with it. Don't deliver a social message or a political message or a religious message from that. Teach them the information, how to think, how to grade their own paper. Yeah. That's good.
Learning local history, at least when I was growing up, was a source of pride. I mean, if you knew something about the area you grew up that you were proud of, and that sounds like your book here offers a chance for people to learn something to be proud of about this area.
It's a great area. Well, you think about it. It was the last frontier. Anderson, Oconee, and Pickens were the last frontier in South Carolina. And you know yourself, you were mentioning Maverick up there a while ago. Maverick went west from Pendleton. So did Earp, White Earp. Pendleton was a staging area for wagon trains going west. Great history, wonderful history. Very worthwhile study, and certainly is fascinating enough in what is by being factual. You don't have to exaggerate, you don't have to expound on it. And you learn from it.
Well, now that you've got a taste for writing history books, you got another one in mind now, or?
I sort of lean toward essays, and I sort of lean toward humor. I've got this little book here.
Yeah, let's talk about your books. How many books have you written?
This is my fourth book. My first book was read on National Public Radio by Dick Estelle from Michigan State. You remember him. He's no longer doing it, but he did it. And my first book was called Don't Kill All the Lawyers, I'll Give You a Short List. Scared a lot of the brethren at the bar. A lot of the lawyers bought it in self-defense because they thought they may appear in there. I don't attack anybody, and any of these things I write has nothing to do with what I write. But my stories, I think, are humorous, but I think they also have a message. I had my friends over at Honey Path, Johnston's, C.L. Johnston was in the cattle business. His daughter, Linda D. Shields, was the clerk of court for years. Beautiful, bright woman. His son, Gary is in the cattle business with him. He had a son named Charlie. Charlie was limited. Charlie had limited capacity, mental capacity. Mr. Johnston and Gary would go to the cattle barn on Saturdays and buy cattle and ship them all over the country. I wrote about this in the lawyer book. Charlie would have his own enterprises. He would go there and buy a goat or a sheep or a duck, and he would swap those things around. And we don't, when you think of people who have limits like that, you're surprised when they demonstrate that they have more intelligence than you think they have. But most people have. You make a serious mistake when you underestimate something. Charlie had a little mule, a little plug mule in his corral. His neighbor said, "Shot, I think that mule is what I need to plow my garden. What do you want for him?" He said, $30. I'll have him in your pasture in the morning. He said, all right, gave him the $30. Charlie delivered the mule. Well, that afternoon, the neighbor called. He said, "Shot, the mule dropped dead." Now, Charlie was faced with a dilemma there. He's a businessman. His reputation was on the line. Charlie also didn't know anything about formalities of contracts and obligations to disclose hidden defects and things that lawyers talk about and make money on. But Charlie had intelligence, the kind of intelligence that you have to self-preservation instinct, intelligence. The man said, "Charlie, mule died." Charlie said, he never done that before. That's intelligence. When I was chairman of the State Board of Education, Dr. Charlie Williams was superintendent. I was presiding over a meeting in the Rutledge building. They had given test scores. Everybody was there. My classmate, Dick Riley, was governor. He was there with his staff. Everybody was there. I was going in, I said to Dr. Williams, I said, "They love these test scores, don't they?" He said, "They certainly do." I said, "How important are test scores?" He said, "We have 20-some, maybe 30, he told me a number I forget, areas of identified intelligence. That many different areas, and there are a lot more, but we have those that we can identify. And we have a limited ability to test in 4 of them. See, you don't know. People surprise you, like Charlie. Charlie was a good businessman, had good instincts. He had sufficient intelligence to do the things that he was called upon to do.
All right, tell me your other 3 books then. You just mentioned the lawyers. When you get the Frank Selvey book, you got
the Frank Selvey book. Listen, Frank was a classmate of mine at Furman. He and I still play golf together. Frank hold a reputation for scoring 100 points in a game in Division I teams. He still holds that record. Other people have done it, but not in this level. He did it against Newberry, 1954. Frank and his wife Barbara asked me to write this book. It wasn't easy to write because Frank won't talk to you. Frank's a hillbilly. He's from Corbin, Kentucky. This book is not a jock book. This book, I use basketball as a background in this book, a backdrop. But in this book, it's called Coal Miner's Son. You remember the coal miner's daughter? Well, they were born very close together over in Kentucky. Backgrounds very similar, within a year of each other. Loretta Lynn, of course. Frank Selvey's daddy went into the coal mines when he was 12 years old. Now, think about that. He never played basketball. He never played anything. He went into a cold, dark place and did cruel, hard work to support his family, because his father was going to prison for killing the man who was trying to kill him under that harsh code of the mountains, you see. And so that's who this man is here. This good-looking man here was a migratory crop worker. All those things. It's a success story basketball was his vehicle, his path. But there are many other paths, and many other people do the same sort of thing he did. And this is just one more of those things. But I was pleased. I've got endorsed by Jerry West, and I got Dick Riley on there. Dick was a classmate of mine at Furman, and I took one of his young pictures when he was at Furman. He looked like a teenager. Dick's like me. He is and should be camera shy, but when he saw this, I think he was right pleased by it. At least I know he didn't complain. He bought some of them and gave them to his friends. The other book was Ain't Mad at Nobody, and it's humorous, but each of the stories have a sort of a parable type message, if I can use that term. You can get humor out of it, but there's a truth in it. It's a moral or truth.
I wonder if you could combine the history and the humor and have one of those hand in glove there, or is history too particular about making sure you got everything right?
Well, you can make a crack or two in a history book, but which one am I going to start? Am I going? Where's my loyalty going to be, to the truth or to the embellishment?
And do you have another book in mind at this point? You've just finished one, and it's like you're talking about. You keep writing.
Well, yeah, I get satisfaction from it, and I've been pleased to have the success I had with it. They sell on Amazon, and I sell them all over the country. Still, people still order them, and I still sell them. And when you write one, you don't plan to keep it. If somebody wants it, you're certainly glad to accommodate them by making it available to them. I'd like to write a book of essays on fundamental things. I like to think, where do you go when your institutions fail? And we're all impacted by our institutions, and we see them crack, crumble, fade, shift, and drift away from, if they don't dramatically fall away from their original mission, they drift away from it. Because when these institutions are formed, generally it's an idealist or someone who has a mission in mind, certainly a purpose. And if it's successful, then it attracts people who are attracted to it because it offers them some type of prestige, perhaps, security, respect, So my thoughts are, when the institutions fail, and they always do, where do you go and what do you fall back on? You fall back on the stuff I'm talking about. Your fundamental truth. What is the fundamental truth? Truth. The fundamental truth is honesty, truth. I have friends in the bowling lanes. Some of them have character that just stands out. They haven't done anything in their lives to get rich or to get a lot of fame from or notoriety or anything else. But you sit down and talk with them, and you bowl a game with them, and you learn from them. It's an amazing thing. We ain't so smart. We're not as bright or exceptional as we might think we are. In the final analysis, they say it rains on the poor, the rich and the poor, the just and the unjust. It rains on all of us. Life does.
And people who want to get your new book, there's going to be an event at the Anderson County Museum, September 10th.
Yes, sir. 5 o'clock.
And you'll be there signing books. And
that's right. And bring your friends. If I sell out, which I hope I do, but of course, if I sell out, I'll take your name and address and I'll get one to you, but please come.